RETROSHOCK. Episode 2. Chapter 3. Light flooded into the second-floor bedroom. The king-size bed was a tangle of sheets with Josh in the middle, face up and bare-chested, dressed only in plaid pajama pants. A bell tone sounded and stirred the young man as his own voice came over the answering machine. The recording was illogical and sounded like an American tourist reading from a Spanish-English phrasebook.
¿Dónde está casa de Pepe? Casa de Pepe está aquí.
There was the obligatory beep, which had no effect on the sleeping figure in the bed. "Good morning, Josh. Don't get up. I trust all is well." The voice on the other end was liquid smooth and spoke with just enough feeling to sound sincere. A $1 million deal of a voice that Josh recognized, but was not prepared to answer. He rolled over and muttered into his pillow as he pulled the covers over his head. It wasn't unusual for Lewis Coulter to call personally, but whenever the multi-billionaire defense contractor called his prized research scientist, it usually meant he wanted something. "Good news, Josh. We've completed work on the new facility. Everything is to specifications and ready for your walkthrough." Josh's face slowly emerged from under the covers, eyelids pressed shut, determined not to open, even though there was no chance he would go back to sleep. "Karen Danners will send the limo over to get you and take you to the lab," Coulter said, as though it was all agreed upon. Josh grumbled and reached out with eyes half closed, fumbling for the phone module on the night table. After several clumsy attempts, he hit the conference call mode and called out to the phone. "Morning, Lou. What can I do for you?" "I believe I was just outlining that," Coulter said, trying to sound both pleasant and generous at the same time. Josh shrank back under the covers, his voice slightly muffled. "Look, I already said I have everything I need right here. I'm completely self-sufficient." The silky voice persisted. "Just take a look at the facility. That's all I'm asking." There was a brief pause during which Josh hardly moved. "Let me sleep on it." "I see. Late night last night. You are a busy young man, Josh. You might say that's why we need to talk." "It's about time," Coulter said. Josh pulled the covers off of his face, his eyes staring wide at the ceiling. "News travels fast," Josh said. "Indeed it does. And I've found you can pay to make it go even faster." Now that he had made his point, Coulter slipped a little more patience into his voice to put Josh at ease. "Look, go back to sleep. I'll meet you in my boardroom at 1. As I said, Karen will send the car around to get you." A second later, there was a quiet click and the conversation was over. Josh stared at the ceiling, then pulled the covers over his head in defeat. At 12:30 sharp, the sleek black limo pulled up outside the rundown 3-story brownstone. It was one of a fleet of Coulter limos. There were 12 in all, each one armor-plated, equipped with bulletproof glass and self-sealing bulletproof tires. The limo was essentially a tank on wheels. Coulter spared no expense on security or personnel. The chauffeur was part of the security package. The man behind the wheel was the same driver who had made the getaway in the alley behind Madison Square Garden. Jimmy was laid back and cool, an ex-Navy SEAL who never went anywhere without his Walther PPK semi-automatic pistol tucked in its holster under his jacket. The man put the car in park, then settled back with his phone and waited for his passenger to arrive as usual. SOP, Jimmy thought and smiled at the routine, standard operational procedure. Before he could get comfortable, he spotted another car in his rearview mirror, then lowered his phone just as a gray gunmetal BMW Roadster pulled up beside him. Josh Kensington sat behind the wheel of the sports car and smiled at the limo driver. It was a devilish grin that said, "You want to go?" Josh revved his engine. Once, then twice. Then pulled away just fast enough to make an impression without squealing the tires. The vanity license plate on the back of the BMW read EMC2, a tribute to Einstein's theory of relativity, to which the limo driver just shook his head. A few minutes later, the Roadster stopped at a red light amidst the noise and bustle of lunch-hour traffic. Josh waited, nestled inside the black leather interior of his car with one hand on the wheel, a foot on the clutch, and a hand on the stick. His radio was tuned to a local rock station, with a fast-talking disc jockey hawking the usual group of products, from mattresses to tires and computer equipment. Josh was grateful for any distraction that would take his mind off his meeting, and frankly was in no rush for the light to turn green when the jockey had finished his obligations to the sponsors. A familiar heavy drum beat, thump, thump, thumped over his speakers. Josh looked down at the radio and started bobbing his head with the soulful rhythm, just as the electric guitar kicked in, accompanied by a heavy bass. When the unmistakable voice of Stevie Wonder started, Josh was right there with him. Superstition. Josh tapped out the rhythm on the steering wheel and slid down an inch or two to accommodate the groove. With his head bopping and fingers drumming, the light could have taken forever now that Stevie was working it. He was well into the song and feeling good when he noticed the college girls in the red Honda next to him, pointing and laughing. By the looks of it, they had been watching him for a while. It was an embarrassing moment, but now that he was busted, there was only one thing to do. Josh rolled down the driver's side power window, and with a few taps of the volume control on his steering wheel, he pumped it up and got on a serious groove. It was a free performance that involved a lot of lip-syncing and gyrations with his head and neck that would have put an older man in traction. When the three girls started to sing back, Josh laughed aloud and knew he was a hit, then looked to his right and saw the black caddy and its driver, a sourpuss blue-haired old lady. She scowled at the shameful display of childish behavior, but since Josh now had three backup singers, he just turned up the music and belted out the lyrics with as much gusto as he could muster. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition is the way. The woman's expression only soured more, but mercifully the light turned green and with a last look of disgust she pulled away. By the time Josh looked back, the three girls were gone and Josh put the car in gear. After the bit of fun, the momentary distraction was over, and he looked ahead to the Coulter Industrial Bank building looming above all the other towers on Park Avenue. The 60-story scraper was an architectural wonder made of concrete, steel, and bronze, entirely owned by Louis Coulter, as were a dozen other towers on the strip. As traffic slowed again, a white Sikorsky helicopter streaked overhead with the Coulter logo emblazoned on the side. The private chopper slowed upon approach as it descended to the heliport atop the Coulter building. Josh checked his watch, 12:50, right on time. 10 minutes later, Josh pulled up outside the huge office building and parked squarely in the middle of a restricted zone. As soon as he stopped, two security guards appeared out of nowhere and approached the car. When they noticed the gold VIP sticker in Josh's window, both men quickly backed off and waved all clear. Josh hopped out in his old worn bomber jacket, blue jeans, a cotton t-shirt and hiking boots, which was as formal as Josh cared to dress, even for board meetings. He locked the BMW, nodded to the guards once again, and had to admit working for Louis Coulter did have its perks. But now it was time to deal with the liabilities. With that realization, Josh put on his game face and joined the steady stream of people entering the office building. The interior of Coulter Corp was as much a work of art as the outside. An indoor fountain and white Italian marble adorned the lobby. Shafts of light shone down through the glass atrium, illuminating modern sculptures of gold and bronze. People moved through the space toward the escalators, and while they streamed up and down, high above, a diagram of Copernicus's star chart etched in gold leaf shimmered against the ceiling. Josh smiled, since it was his recommendation to include the masterful design when the interior was being built. He gazed up at the wonder and artistry which, as usual, escaped the people around him as they stepped off the escalator and headed for the elevators. The revolution of heavenly spheres, Josh said, and never ceased to marvel at the man behind the theory. A theory that had become scientific fact. It was all there. The sheer genius of the man was inescapable. As inescapable as the collision with the woman who was talking on her cell phone and looking down at her watch. The woman rocked back from the impact and dropped her briefcase as Josh grabbed her by the shoulders. "I'm so sorry," Josh said, but one look at the woman told him he was lying. The blonde was a cosmopolitan knockout, dressed in a tan designer suit that hugged her body in all the right places. She was young with an air of sophistication and professionalism that made her appear older and more mature. She stepped back, which forced Josh to let her go, then closed her cell phone with an expectant look that said, "Well?" Josh quickly bent down to pick up the leather briefcase, then came up slowly, trying not to stare at her legs on the way up, which he failed at miserably. He handed over the briefcase. "Here you are. I'm terribly sorry. That was my fault," he said, hoping for a little conversation. The woman merely regarded Josh with an annoyed glance, took the briefcase and continued on her way. "I'm fine. Thank you," Josh called after her as though she cared, enjoying the view as she walked away. A quick glance at his watch told him he had time. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. A crowd formed in front of one of the elevators and Josh made his way through, till he was standing right next to the woman again. Now that she had made her lack of interest clear, Josh decided to have some fun. He stared at her, and was so obvious the woman finally had no choice but to confront him. "Is there a problem?" Josh smiled at the sound of her voice and considered it a small victory. He also considered the question for a moment and tried to sound thoughtful. Disenfranchisement of the working class? A destabilized economy due to unfair trade agreements? Economic imbalance among third world nations? World hunger? Can you be a little more specific? The woman gave Josh a weak smile, dripping with sarcasm as if to say, "Nice try." Josh looked on, with childlike fascination. When the elevator arrived, everyone piled in until the lift was full, then stood quietly when the doors closed. Josh continued to beam his smile, while the woman stared straight ahead and pretended he wasn't there. She felt safe since the elevator was an awkward place to talk and knew the man would be getting off before her. "So, you from around here?" Josh said as though he fully expected an answer, which drew the attention of everyone except the woman. The tall blonde held a determined gaze on the indicator lights above them, while Josh continued to stare and smile. Everyone else watched and waited, until eventually, people filed out at their respective floors and it was only the two of them once again, with only the executive penthouse level remaining, which required a security card to access the floor. The woman finally turned to Josh, who was still smiling pleasantly. "Last stop," she said flatly and nodded to the open door. Josh stepped forward and slid his key into the slot, which closed the doors again. "Going up?" he asked, and enjoyed the hint of surprise on the woman's beautiful face. Josh put the card back in his pocket, and the woman watched him with a look of sudden suspicion, as if to say, "Where did you get that?" Josh folded his arms in front of him and smiled contentedly as if to answer, "Wouldn't you like to know?" Then, as if to announce that the truce was over, she turned away again and gave Josh the coldest shoulder possible. A few moments later, the elevator doors opened onto the executive level. The silver letters of Coulter Corporation were mounted on the wall and shone brightly. Josh got off the elevator, right behind the woman, who took several steps toward the giant logo, watching the man's reflection the whole time. Just as she was about to round on him, Carl Grasso appeared from around a corner and was moving fast. The moment the woman saw him, she became the picture of politeness and was full of apologies. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grasso. There's been a problem with the satellite link-up from Tokyo. It looks like we won't have the Eastern board members for your 2 o'clock via CLI, but they're still working on it." Josh watched the woman in silent fascination as she continued in earnest, trying her best to be as helpful as possible, while Grasso stood there, looking back and forth, anxiously waiting for her to finish. Josh simply stood by patiently as the woman continued and pretended to take an interest in whatever she was saying, even if Grasso wouldn't. "They said it could be restored within the hour, but they wouldn't promise us anything. Something about a weak signal on their end due to repairs to the antenna array that..." The woman paused when Grasso looked past her to Josh, aware that no man had looked past her since she was 12. "It's okay, Grassman. I know you couldn't help yourself. All those dollar signs floating around your head. I know," Josh said and turned to the blonde. "A weak signal? Bad link? No problem. Carl here can just open his big mouth and the information should get to them in no time. Right, Carl? Especially if it's high-level stuff. So sensitive a greedy, empty-headed, bureaucratic lapdog like you can spill your guts." Grasso shook off the insult. "Just doing my job. This is bigger than all of us, even you, Josh." The woman was already flabbergasted, and her expression only changed slightly when she suddenly realized who he was. "There's your problem," Josh said. "Nice meeting you." Josh walked away, leaving the woman and Grasso behind. Casey Maltese, Karen Danner's beautiful assistant, watched Josh go, and waited uncomfortably while Grasso tried to recover from the verbal attack. Tell their people to keep working on it. We'll go ahead without the board members and Coulter will have Karen give them an updated transcript." Before the woman could say a thing, Grasso chased after Josh. Once he was gone, Casey slumped her shoulders and could have kicked herself for not recognizing the corporation's top scientific researcher. "That's it. I'm fired," Casey said with a sarcastic smile, then turned and walked away. The executive level of the Coulter building was even more impressive and elaborate than the lobby. Bay windows and skylights illuminated the hall. Josh ignored it all as he marched down the corridor.
"Will you wait a minute?"
Grasso yelled, then caught up to him and tried to keep pace as they approached Coulter's executive boardroom. "What did you tell him?" Josh shot back, refusing to look at him. "What was I supposed to do? You can't keep this kind of a thing a secret." Yeah, I noticed, Josh said, with Grasso hustling beside him. Anyway, what's the problem? You stand to make a lot of money. This is the find of the century, the millennium, hell, the whole history of the world. It's a sweet deal. Don't mess it up. Josh glanced over at Grasso. Wrong. This is no day at the office. You work for them. I work for myself. Grasso grabbed Josh by the arm and spun him around to stop him in his tracks. Is that so? Wake up, kid. All your little toys, your expensive lifestyle, it's all paid for by the Coulter Corporation. That's Louis Coulter. A word to the wise, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Josh glared back and went nose to nose with the big Italian. This project is off the table. I never told them it was for sale, and it's not, Josh said. Grasso reached out and Josh looked down at the card in his hand. Glossy black plastic with the Coulter logo CC embossed in white letters. What's that? Security pass, just take it, Grasso said more soberly as Josh held the card and examined it. Coulter decides what's off the table, kid. Face it. If Coulter wants it, he gets it. Josh shook his head. It's not for sale. Then continued to the cherrywood doors of the executive boardroom. Grasso adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, and called to him. You signed a contract, Josh. That means they own you. You're meat. Josh shrugged it off and smiled. Then let's go feed the wolves. The moment Josh entered the boardroom, things got quiet, and he immediately scanned the room to see who was in attendance. There were 8 men and 3 women seated at the oak conference table. Josh recognized 3 of the men and was sure he had never seen the others. Still, in an instant he knew that this was much more than a meeting of show and tell. One of the women was undeniably French. She was very fashionable, angular with short-cropped black hair and an affected air of superiority. Josh took an instant dislike to her the moment he saw her. The older gentleman seated next to her, with the well-cropped beard and short turban, was obviously Indian, perhaps Pakistani. The pendant on his white tunic and the rings on his fingers were large enough to be costume jewelry. But in this crowd, Josh knew they had to be the genuine article. There was a black man, an African diplomat, who wore a pleasant smile and a colorful tribal sash draped over the shoulder of a very conservative business suit. He sported a gold Rolex watch and what looked like a large sapphire pendant, which held the sash together, another rock from what was probably a private mine. The rest of the board members were an assortment of equally rich and prominent fat cats who had obviously been called together from different corners of the world to meet the brainchild. Once Josh scanned the room, he quickly realized that the board of 11 constituted a super corporate conglomerate. These were representatives of other nations and industry that had holdings in Coulter Corp. And now that they had been banded together at the behest of Louis Coulter, they were a secret society of unimaginable wealth and power. One might speculate that this august gathering quite possibly fancied themselves as the self-appointed guardians of humanity, and the meeting was of an extraordinary nature, perhaps even sinister. Normally he would have scoffed at such an idea, calling it conspiratorial, even paranoid, but now that Coulter was aware of the invention, the notion was all too plausible. In front of each person was a black binder, presumably a dossier on Josh, who, according to all the best data available, was the most prolific mind to grace the planet since Albert Einstein, and he for the moment was the focus of their attention. Only one man on the planet came close to his level of genius. Coulter had bought him as well. Simon Pelletier was fiercely competitive, a slight man of average height and conservatively dressed. With thinning, sandy brown hair and gold-rimmed glasses, the renowned scientist wasn't much to look at, but his quick wit, prodigious intellect, and overinflated ego more than made up for it. Pelletier was fiercely competitive, and at 20 years Josh's senior, he was in every sense of the word, a jealous rival. Seated just to his left at the center of the row was the master of ceremonies himself, Louis Coulter. At 47, Louis Coulter knew how to make an impression without even trying. The man was magnetic. At 6'3", dark brown hair, blue eyes, and a lantern jaw, Coulter was bigger than life. As the head of a modern empire, Louis Coulter managed to remain understated, which added to his mystique. Grasso often said, when it came to protocol and public relations, the man could read your pulse from across the room. Josh tried to keep his pulse to himself as Coulter glanced over and smiled, then quickly went to work on the crowd, who was eager for a word or a glance. Josh had to admit, even in his quiet moments, Coulter was a lion among lambs, powerful and always in control. Just as the door began to swing closed behind Josh, Karen Danners entered and hurried past on her way to her seat. With a stroke of her hand, she slicked back her short red hair. The executive assistant took her place just to the left of Coulter, opened her laptop, and flashed a brief smile to the other members of the board. Before the door could close completely, Grasso slipped into the room behind Josh and took a seat. "Good afternoon, Josh." Coulter gestured to the chair across from him, which would conveniently put him on display directly in front of the entire board and all its members. "No thanks," Josh said. "I'll stand." Coulter simply kept going. "I trust you had no problem getting here. How was traffic?" Josh disregarded the chit-chat and looked the panel up and down. He was being fattened up for the kill and knew he had to keep moving if only to throw them off guard. He slipped his hands in his pockets, and the panel of onlookers shifted in their seats to watch as Josh meandered around to their side of the room. Moving behind them, he pretended to admire the decor, the row of exquisite original oil paintings hanging on the walls, then paused at a Renoir and slowly continued, completing his trip around the room to look at the other masterpieces. "Nice copy," Josh said with a nod toward the Renoir. Coulter smiled, impressed by the young man's powers of observation. "Mea culpa, very good." "The Renoir is a copy," Coulter said, conceding the point. "It's a good one," Josh added, as he returned to his side of the table and took off the old leather jacket, tossed it on the chair next to him and finally plopped down in front of the panel, rubbed the arms of the oversized chair, took another look around the opulent boardroom, then grinned. "Sure beats the heck out of selling insurance, don't it?" Josh looked the panel up and down again, taken aback by his boldness, and perhaps even his lack of good diction, anything to keep them guessing and off balance. The statement was a reference to Coulter's distant past, a dig that caused Coulter's smile to fade somewhat. Josh scanned the panel. "How's everybody doing?" he said, trying to stay on the offensive. No one answered, and since it was clear that Josh would be hard to handle, they remained silent for the moment and were perfectly content to let Coulter rein him in. Colonel Raymond Maxfield was the only other person Josh recognized. Maxfield was a heavy-set, barrel-chested, white-haired gentleman with a crew cut sharp enough to shave the bark off a tree. He was seated at the end of the table, to Josh's far right. Maxfield watched Josh with steely eyes, jaw set, ill-amused by the young pup. The boy's intelligence meant nothing to Maxfield. He was a man of action, a hardcore, jar-headed ex-Marine from Texas, now military consultant for Coulter Corporation. In truth, as far as he was concerned, the boy was a liability, a problem waiting to happen, and Josh knew it. He ignored the colonel's stony gaze for the moment and focused on the people he didn't know to keep the smokescreen going and have a little fun. "Wow, looks like we've got half of the UN delegation, right here." Again, no one seemed amused. Coulter ignored the statement and tried to get the meeting moving forward. "Josh, the board members expressed an interest in meeting you, and Josh smacked the table with an open palm, which made a few board members jump. "You know it's just a guess, but I bet that if a bomb went off in this room right now, the whole dang stock market would crash in a day," Josh said with a nice broad smile. "I'd probably even lose money, but hey, I'd be dead too, right? So there you go." The board members looked at each other a little unsure. Josh could see it on their faces, each one questioning whether this was really the individual responsible for all the scientific innovations that had made them billions. Josh smiled in earnest. One well-placed, incoherent statement was usually enough to bog down any well-planned meeting. Coulter pretended to be amused. "I told you he was colorful," he said, and never took his eyes off of his prey. The panel of board members smiled while others laughed heartily. And just like that, they were back on track and Coulter had even established an advantage. He was aloof and Josh was a clown. Coulter's smile faded. "Personality and antics aside, you have been a tremendous asset and resource to each of us." Josh nodded graciously and folded his hands in front of him like an obedient schoolboy, ready for the day's lesson. "Congratulations on your monumental success. Once again, you've exceeded expectations," Coulter said warmly, trying to ply Josh with compliments. The board members smiled and nodded their approval. A few applauded and eagerly awaited anything the young man might have to say. "Thank you," Josh said. It was a cordial response, one that left everyone flat. When it was clear that the young man could not be coaxed or baited into giving any further information beyond what they had in their dossier, the board members stared in silent frustration. Coulter's eyes turned cold as he tired of the charade. "Name your price," he said, which was more of a command than an offer. Now that the issue of money was on the table, the panel seemed more focused and in control. "You don't waste any time, do you?" "It's not for sale," Josh said, and managed to maintain his smile in defiance to Coulter and everyone else in attendance. Coulter looked down at the dossier in front of him and closed the folder. He slid it away gently, then drew his arms back and placed his palms flat on the table. It was a gesture that said, "Let's get serious." As I said, you've worked very hard, and that kind of dedication should be rewarded. Coulter paused to let the other board members lend their support, at which time they began to nod again, some board members more vigorously than others, after which he continued in a more warm and friendly tone. "This is your opportunity, Josh, the opportunity to reap the benefits of your labor." Again, the others smiled their encouragement. "No thanks." Their hopes were dashed. Josh half expected someone to explode, but instead a quiet laughter came from the end of the table. Colonel Maxfield looked up from his folder, smiling wryly. The old military man spoke with his slow Texas drawl. "I thought you were supposed to be smart," he said, hating the young man's insubordination. "Mr. Coulter is trying to be tactful, son, so don't be stupid. He's not asking you. He's telling you. Take the money." Maxfield smiled, like he always did after a good hearty threat. Josh nodded at the old soldier. "Colonel Raymond Maxfield, a pleasure as always. It's been a while. By the way, I took your advice and read your book, the one on tactical engagement in open warfare. Insightful. I especially liked the chapter on aggression and superiority through domination. Speaking of domination, how's Mrs. Maxfield?" Josh had met her once, a stern and formidable Southern belle that could not be pushed around. Maxfield winced at the comment, while Karen Danners and the other women on the board tried to suppress their laughter. Josh turned back to Coulter after poking the old bull with a stick. "Hey look, you don't need me. You've got the smartest man in the whole world sitting right next to you. Anything I can do, he can do better." Josh gave Simon Pelletier a casual glance, and the man hardly flinched at Josh's false humility. With that, the door opened, and the beautiful blonde quietly entered the room and made her way quickly to Karen Danners. Josh's eyes followed her, as did every eye in the room, except Coulter, who had suddenly found his advantage and prepared to set the hook. "All right, Josh, but there is still the matter of the facility we've provided for you. You won't find a better laboratory in the world. Simon here has designed it. At least take a look and see what you think. We would appreciate any suggestions you might have to offer." Josh hardly listened as the woman delivered her message to Danners and headed for the door. Josh turned his head and followed her like a tracking device, and just as she reached for the doorknob, "Ms. Maltese." The woman stopped and turned stiffly, surprised to hear her name. "Yes, Mr. Coulter?" Josh enjoyed the opportunity to stare a little longer, and took in everything about her as she stood there. Her face, her smile, and awkward mannerism when she was taken off guard. "Josh, this is Catherine Maltese, Ms. Danners' assistant. Around here we call her KC." Casey offered a polite smile. "We met at the elevator." "How do you do?" Josh said, beaming once more. "The pleasure was all mine," he added with a flourish. The woman obviously agreed with her polite smile and refused to look at Josh again. Coulter laughed like the master manipulator and made his move. "Well, if you're not busy, Ms. Maltese here could take you out to see the research lab at our new facility." Casey froze, while Josh's face lit up with mock surprise, and he suddenly became the company man who was more than ready to cooperate. "A new research lab? You know, that does sound interesting." "I guess I could find the time," Josh said, and turned his chair to look at Casey. "What do you say?" he asked, beaming like a schoolboy. The act was so transparent, it was hardly amusing, least of all to the beautiful blonde who did her best to hold on to her plastic smile. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Coulter." "Good. Take the rest of the day off. Give Josh the full tour." Coulter waved them on. Josh jumped up from the table like an eager pup, grabbed his jacket, and stood next to the woman. "I'm all yours," he said, and proceeded where he had left off at the elevator. Embarrassed in front of the whole panel, Casey stood there, unable to move, with her corporate smile frozen, and tried to think of how she had been roped into the assignment. Although she hadn't recognized Josh Kensington at first, he had still made an impression on her, one she could have done without. Aside from his chiseled good looks and boyish demeanor, there was something about the young man she found instantly annoying. And the idea that this so-called genius was somehow responsible for the enormous interruption in her day only made matters worse. But since the order had come directly from her boss and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it, she cocked her head at a jaunty angle, and with a perky smile she chirped, "Great." Josh wore a silly smirk on his face that was far too cheerful as he held the conference room door, and Casey held her temper. With her feet firmly planted, she glanced toward Karen Danners, as if to apologize for the situation which was completely out of her control, then eventually had to surrender and marched out the door. Chapter 4. Casey exited the office building, moving with the long, sultry stride of a runway model, and didn't look back. People on the sidewalk watched the blonde approach the glistening stretch limo and the chauffeur, who opened the passenger side door, when someone whistled. Like all attractive women, Casey had grown accustomed to whistles. However, this was a different kind. It was loud and piercing, the kind that summons cabs across 3 lanes of traffic and brings them screeching to a halt at the curb. When she looked, a set of car keys were sailing over the hood of the limo, straight toward her face. Casey caught them in front of her, then tossed her hair, and watched Josh head around to his BMW parked behind the limo. "Let's take my car. You drive," he said, and waved to the limo driver. "Hey, Jimmy." Once again, Jimmy just shook his head at the young man who had refused him earlier, and was now about to steal his pretty passenger. Casey stood next to the limo driver, with the keys in her hand, and glared at Josh, who appeared puzzled as he waited beside his car. "You can drive a stick, can't you?" Casey glanced at the gunmetal roadster, and her expression quickly changed to one of determination. "Thank you, Jimmy. I'll call you if I need you," Casey said, and moved past the limo driver. Jimmy watched her leave, then lowered his head and mumbled, "Good luck." Casey rounded the BMW, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat. Josh's silly smile returned as he climbed in on the passenger side. He watched the young woman look around briefly, to familiarize herself with the dashboard and controls. She fastened her seatbelt, adjusted her seat and rear-view mirror with a ritualistic calm, which instantly caused Josh a little concern. It was reminiscent of Andretti, preparing the cockpit of a Formula One for an Indianapolis time trial. Casey put the key in the ignition and started the car. The engine purred to life and then roared wildly as Casey floored the gas pedal, revving it severely until it seemed the engine might leap out from under the hood and take off on its own. Josh's smile turned into a grimace until Casey mercifully let up off the gas, and the engine purred smoothly once again. Like I said, you can drive a stick, can't you?" Casey grabbed the stick shift, jiggled it in neutral, then shoved it into first gear and smiled wickedly. Josh looked at the woman who was literally in the driver's seat and knew all he could do was plead for mercy. "Remember, you have to be nice to me." Tires squealed, blue smoke filled the air, and Jimmy the chauffeur jumped back as the gunmetal roadster fishtailed left and right, burning rubber out of the parking space, and shot out into traffic like a rocket, headed uptown. Josh stared wide-eyed, with his head pressed back, then glanced at the beautiful blonde whose attention was riveted to the road. Doing 80 northbound on the Deegan Expressway, she put the car through its paces, downshifting to change lanes, then accelerating on the open stretches. The woman hardly oversteered as she picked her way through the slower-moving traffic and kept Josh white-knuckled and shoved back in his seat. "You always drive like this?" Josh said, and tried to work a little moisture into his mouth. Casey ignored the question as she downshifted behind a tractor-trailer, then checked her mirror and hit the gas to slingshot around the truck and pull away in the high-speed lane. Josh watched the speedometer climb from 75 to 80, 85, 90. "This is a little fast, don't you think?" Casey tried not to smile and stared straight ahead, determined to make him apologize for his rudeness or pee in his pants, whichever came first. Josh tried to think of something to say to make her slow down as the BMW approached 100 miles an hour, passing other cars in a blur. You know, if you kill me, you could lose your job," he said, and did his best to sound calm. With that, the speedometer dropped down to 90, then 80, then 75. Josh breathed more regularly and smiled as they joined the normal flow of traffic. "We certainly need more defensive drivers like you on the road." Casey ignored the comment and frowned straight ahead. "That's better," Josh said, as though they were making progress. "So what exactly is it you do at Coulter Corporation?" Casey took a deep breath as though the pain of the day was unavoidable, and she would simply have to deal with the particular pain seated next to her whether she liked it or not. "Operations manager," she said, and kept it short like a prisoner being interrogated by the enemy. "That sounds very interesting," Josh said, and couldn't have sounded less sincere. Casey shook her head and dismissed the comment, then looked increasingly perplexed, like she was working out what to say and considering the best way to say it. After a few seconds, she glanced over with somewhat of a pained look on her face. Look, let's cut the chit-chat. I'd like to save you a lot of time and effort. You're not my type and I really don't like you, so it's best if we don't talk. Oh, okay. Fair enough, he said and nodded like a good soldier. Then, as quick as he could, he placed his elbow on the center console, leaned over with his chin on his hand and blurted out, "You are absolutely the most drop-dead gorgeous woman I have ever seen." Casey kept her eyes on the road and casually checked the rear-view mirror as though the seat next to her was empty. Josh fell back in his seat and gazed at the ceiling with a sigh of relief. Whew, didn't know how long I could hold that in. I'm glad that's over. Doing 80, Casey ignored that as well, then signaled to pass a police cruiser. Josh did a double take at the car. Casey glanced over at him. They say you're a genius. Are you? The question was so matter-of-fact it sounded like more of a challenge. Josh gave it some thought. I guess that all depends on who you're talking to, he said, glancing back to see the police cruiser take the exit. Mr. Grasso says you're probably the most brilliant mind since Einstein. Josh smiled. Compared to Carl, everybody's brilliant. Casey nodded, and since she didn't like Grasso, had to admit it was the first thing they happened to agree upon. I heard Dr. Pelletier describe you as a breakthrough genius. He said your theories on quantum mechanics are the most daring and insightful he's ever seen. Josh looked genuinely surprised. Pelletier said that? Must have been drunk. You know much about science? He asked. I majored in business law and minored in chemistry, she said. Josh held a thoughtful gaze. Really? Casey continued to drive and could hear the wheels turning. All right, what is it? She asked and glanced over. He was squinting at her. You don't strike me as the textbook type. Frankly, I see you as more, well, Josh slipped his arm around the back of the driver's seat. Shall we say, high maintenance? Casey gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and narrowed her eyes. How did you get such a large ego into that tiny brain? Josh smiled and just stared dreamily. It's a tight fit, he said. Casey finally exhaled. She had done her best to insult, rebuff, or otherwise turn the young man away, and it was no use. Just make the best of a bad situation, she told herself, then glanced over again and managed a glimmer of a smile. You're nothing at all like what I expected, Casey said. It was the closest thing to a compliment and took Josh totally by surprise. Thank you, he said, and for the first time seemed at a loss for words. You're far more obnoxious than I imagined. Josh was stunned. He had walked straight into that one, and Casey smiled with a look that could have easily been followed by a fist pump in victory. Slowly, she loosened her grip on the steering wheel, and for the first time seemed to be enjoying herself. Once they were off of the interstate, 20 miles north of the Connecticut border, it was rural country. The BMW drove along the winding roads through the quaint hills of a small bedroom town. A few minutes later, they turned onto a private road, surrounded by dense woods, and headed up a long drive. They came over a crest and the trees parted. The BMW slowed as they passed a granite slab in front of a well-manicured lawn with the words, Coulter Laboratories, etched into the stone. Behind it was a sprawling industrial park that looked more like a posh gated community. The car approached the guard shack, a concrete bunker designed to take a tank shell, nicely disguised with wood siding and a red shingled roof. Casey stopped and flashed her ID, color-coded blue. The guards were paramilitary armed with semi-automatic weapons and wore black jumpsuits with special insignias that Josh didn't recognize. The point man was blonde, expertly built in all business. He nodded at KC, then looked over at Josh. Josh stared back blankly and then remembered. He fished around in his coat pocket, then slowed his arm movement when the guards seemed to tense up and watch him more closely. Josh pulled out the black security card Grasso had given him and waved it at the guard. The man nodded sharply and waved them on. The BMW rolled forward, and KC looked over at him. Wow, top clearance, she said, genuinely impressed. Yeah, Josh said, looking at the card with equal surprise, then put it back in his pocket, like he had nothing to do with it. They rolled through the front gate, and Josh took note of the dual airplane hangar, landing strip, and heliport. A formidable-looking Apache helicopter was parked on one of 3 landing pads next to the hangar, with a ground crew gathered around the nose cone of the high-tech chopper. Casey drove on through the property, which was meticulously landscaped, and pulled up to the lab building, essentially a large white warehouse structure, with several annexes built around it. Black mirrored glass surrounded the entire first floor of the building and unified the connecting structures. Casey rolled into a guest parking space near the front, shut the car off, pulled the keys out, and tossed them to Josh. "This is it, the tech center." Josh looked at the stark white building, which gave no clue of what lay inside. "You coming?" With that, Casey climbed out of the car and shut the door behind her. She walked up the path, headed for the tinted glass doors, and heard the passenger door of the BMW slam shut behind her. When she looked back, Josh was padding off across the lawn toward the panoramic view of the valley and the quiet little hamlet on the hillside in the distance. Then, without a glance behind him, he sat down, cross-legged on the grass, and made himself comfortable. Casey stood by the doors of the tech center and watched in dismay, then with pursed lips, marched across the grass in her heels, looking more determined than graceful. Just as she stormed up beside him and was about to open her mouth, Josh seemed to read her mind. "Before you get started, why don't you sit down for a minute, please?" Casey glared at him and the ridiculous request and thought about all the things she could say. "I don't have time for this. This is not a picnic. Stop acting like a child." Deciding that nothing she could say would probably do any good, she gathered herself up with a huff and plopped down beside him, trying to look as dignified as she could in the process. "May I remind you? We came to see the lab," she said with as much patience as she could muster. Josh looked out across the rolling hills with a gentle breeze on the air and the warm sun on his face. "What's wrong with us, really, when we can walk right past this and not even see it?" Casey took a moment to give a cursory look at the surrounding landscape, then tried to be polite. "I'm supposed to show you the laboratory and familiarize you with—" Josh held up his hand. "You want to go inside a dark, stuffy lab on a beautiful day like this? I'll be here when you get back." That was the last straw. Casey pointed her finger in his face and wagged it under his nose. "Oh, no you don't. I didn't drive all the way out here for you to stonewall and pull some kind of stunt for attention. They said you were hard to work with, but you're not going to jerk me around, mister. This is completely unacceptable, and I will personally lodge a formal—" "Whoa! Wow! Cool down! Don't get your shorts in a bundle." Casey paused again, amazed at his arrogance, and sat up even straighter. "Listen, stud, my shorts are not the issue here. It's your total and utter lack of professionalism." Okay, I'm sorry. Just hear me out," Josh said with his hands up to slow her down. Casey took a breath, then tossed her hair back to listen to what he had to say. "Your job is not in jeopardy," Josh reassured her, which seemed to help somewhat. "Forget about the lab. Coulter knows I couldn't care less about it, and he also knows the only reason I came out here was to spend time with you, and that's the honest truth." Casey's expression turned to one of absolute disbelief. "You are the most arrogant, self-absorbed, unprofessional," Josh nodded. Egocentric, self-centered." "Stop it," Casey yelled and jumped up. "Just trying to help. Can't you conform to the rules just once? Not everybody is out to get you, you know." Josh stared out at the countryside. "That's not how I see it." Casey looked at him, and for a moment he looked small and alone sitting on the hillside. "Why are you so paranoid?" Josh looked up at her and held her gaze, then twisted around to see the enormous compound and the tech center behind him. Josh shrugged his shoulders and squinted up at her. "I don't know. Maybe it's the company I keep?" Casey huffed in frustration, then turned to walk away and paused. "You know, I don't get it. It's not like they even need you anymore," she yelled, then continued on. Josh turned to see Casey marching up the hill toward the lab building and found the comment puzzling. "Hey, what does that mean?" The sound of helicopter blades whirred out of the distance as the Sikorsky came across the valley straight toward them. Josh stood to his feet and started up the hill as the chopper whirred overhead, then circled around and descended to the heliport beyond the tech center. "Hey!" Josh called again. When he reached the walk in front of the tech center, Casey rounded on him with her hair blowing and yelled over the helicopter noise. "Dr. Pelletier has duplicated all your experiments. He's copied everything. They have the machine. All they want you to do is inspect the prototype." With the sound of the helicopter engines dying down behind them, Josh just stood there. After a while, Casey wondered if it was shock or if he had even heard what she said. "Didn't you know?" With that, Josh rushed past and entered the building. Casey kept pace and flashed her security card as they passed the first 2 security checkpoints. Josh went through in a daze and without incident as the guards nodded him on and they advanced down the main corridor. "How could you not know?" Casey said, and might as well have been talking to herself. The halls of the lab building were antiseptically clean. Personnel in white lab uniforms moved busily up and down the corridors. At the next checkpoint, 2 armed guards manned a glass airlock at the end of the White Hall. Casey flashed her ID card once again. These men were a little more cordial than the other guards, although no less imposing. "Afternoon, Ms. Maltese." The guard was an enormous black man who looked more like a bodybuilder with sleeves conveniently short enough to show off his biceps. The automatic rifle draped over his chest was equally impressive. "Good afternoon, Larry," Casey said, still distracted by the man she accompanied. Josh stepped forward to look through the thick glass airlock and see what lay ahead, but the door refused to open. "Excuse me, sir." Josh turned to see the guard peering down at him, then flashed the black ID card. "Professor Kensington?" the guard asked in his deep baritone voice. "Yeah," Josh said, a little surprised, since the card had no name on it as far as he could see. "Just a minute, sir," the guard said, then called back to his partner, an equally fit Sergeant Rock type, who checked a list on his clipboard. "Here you go," the big guard said, and handed Josh a clip-on security badge with his name on it. "It's just a formality, but this will save you any further headaches from this point on." "Thanks," Josh said, and clipped the badge to his jacket. With that, the heavy pressurized door slid open on a cushion of compressed air. Casey marched on. Josh stepped through and looked around, moving more cautiously, while Casey continued on ahead. Josh focused his eyes on the end of the corridor, which was pitch black. It was as though the hall led into outer space, or a space that was just as dark and starless. "Where does this go?" Josh asked reluctantly. "You'll see," Casey said, and kept moving. Josh peered ahead as the hall grew dimmer. With a few more yards, the corridor ended abruptly. They stepped out onto a metal platform into darkness, overlooking the cavernous space that stretched out below them. Casey spoke softly, as though trying to break the news to him gently. "This is the hub of Tech Center, otherwise known as the lab. This 100,000 square foot hangar has been in development for 18 months and was only completed a week ago. Every resource Coulter had at his disposal was poured into it. He spared no expense. The installation is even equipped with its own power grid." Josh gazed down at the space, which was roughly half the size of a football field and dwarfed his own warehouse laboratory. A network of girders, ducts, and catwalks lined the ceiling with elevated cranes mounted on tracks for heavy construction. While below, the lab floor was sunken several stories beneath ground level, with countless electronic consoles and workstations, all arranged in circular rows like an amphitheater, mirroring his own laboratory, but much larger and far more advanced. Spotlit at the center of the lab was the time machine, an exact replica of his own. Only instead of bronze, the hull was polished steel, perfectly dome-shaped and shimmering like a jewel under the spotlights. Josh marveled at the army of technicians, moving busily from station to station like soldier ants working in the shadows surrounding the sparkling time chamber. Josh staggered forward, grasping the metal railing before him. "I don't believe it," he whispered. Suddenly there was a rousing round of applause. Louis Coulter and Simon Pelletier entered the lab from somewhere below, escorted by a small entourage, and moved to the main control platform that stood before the time machine near the center of the lab. The control platform was elevated several feet above the rest and comprised a bank of central control consoles that formed a semicircle facing the time chamber. This was manned by 6 launch control technicians. Josh watched as Coulter climbed the steps of the control platform, and one of the men greeted him with a clipboard, then shook Coulter's hand and went back to work, as did everyone else. The place began to hum once again, as an entire crew of lab technicians converged on the main control platform, presumably to get their orders. Beyond the busy control center, special technicians made adjustments to the hydraulic undercarriage of the time chamber. Vapor rose off of the liquid nitrogen couplers and fuel lines, which made the silver time chamber look ominous and ghostly against the thick haze. Josh watched from his perch, 30 feet above the lab, and all of the life seemed to drain out of him as he took it all in. Then with the press of a button, the platform lowered, and they began the descent. Josh hardly said anything, and by the time they had reached the lab floor, Casey felt like she had indeed led the sheep to slaughter. "Look, I'm sorry. I thought this was all made clear to you prior to..." Josh started forward without a word and seemingly without any concern for what she had to say. Pelletier was still in the process of assigning various duties to the lab techs and busy sending them off one by one when Josh arrived and mounted the platform as the last technicians went on their way. Coulter turned to see Josh standing there, the time machine glistening behind him, beyond the perimeter of warning markers. Josh gazed at his invention, speechless. Coulter allowed him time to soak it all in, while Pelletier stood by smug and confident, aware that this was indeed a shock and enjoyed every moment of it. Coulter initialed a few more documents, then handed off the electronic tablet and stylus to a lab tech who nodded and walked away. "Welcome, Josh. Glad you could make it," Coulter said, testing the waters. Josh offered no response. Coulter tried again, and this time came alongside Josh. Together they marveled at the view of the time machine, spotlit at the center of the cavernous and dark laboratory. "What do you think? How'd we do?" "Exquisite, isn't she?" Josh stepped forward and the 6 central control techs turned to watch him. There was another long and awkward pause as Josh peered at the machine. "Has it been tested?" he asked in a flat monotone. Pelletier, who had been bursting at the seams, finally stepped forward. "Most certainly, but with great care. We've moved forward in stages, powering her up incrementally, analyzing the stasis of the time shell." Josh looked past the man and merely repeated the question. "Has it been tested?" Pelletier tried to remain aloof in front of Coulter and resented the implication that he had avoided the question. "As I said, we are moving in incremental stages. The last trial run was a static test, just a glimpse through the looking glass, if you will," he said, and felt sufficiently clever enough to have redeemed himself. Again, there was no response from Josh, who just kept staring. Coulter stepped forward and motioned toward the time chamber. "I've been here every day, watching, observing the progress. I take my hat off to you, Josh. It's quite a discovery, truly an exciting piece of technology." Josh spoke in a daze. "How'd you do it?" Coulter motioned to Pelletier. "I'll let the good doctor field that one as well," Coulter said and stepped back, prepared to watch the 2 geniuses slug it out. Pelletier was keen to answer. "You were probed and didn't even know it. Thermal holographic spectral analysis from the nose cone of an Apache at night, through your walls." "You spied on me," Josh said, and turned to look the man in the eyes. Pelletier enjoyed the expression on Josh's face and wasn't sure if he had ever seen him look quite so helpless. "Nothing personal," Pelletier said. "It's a surveillance tool I tinkered together about a year ago. We had a use for it and it needed to be tested. Figured I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Took us a while to compile all the data we needed, but I'd say it did its job." Josh looked at the floor and shook his head. "You're a real piece of work, Simon." "This is business, Josh. You weren't forthcoming. We needed the information. I took the initiative." "You took my idea," Josh said slowly. "Let's not be petty, Josh. There's enough profit here for everyone." "Profit?" Josh sneered, then calmed himself and turned away to look at the lab techs working on the hydraulic legs, retracted beneath the time chamber. "A glimpse through the looking glass." Josh repeated the words and smiled to himself, as it all became clear. "You tried, didn't you? You tried to go all the way, but you couldn't. You couldn't make the time jump." Pelletier looked around for something to say. Coulter rushed to his defense, like a cornerman trying to keep his fighter on his feet at the end of the round. "We did try," Coulter said. "And as Simon pointed out, we saw into the past, Lincoln's assassination to be precise. It was amazing. Everything, we could see everything, the moments leading up to it." Coulter gestured in front of him as he laid it all out in his mind's eye. The play and the actors, Lincoln in his box in the balcony, the dim lighting, and Booth, John Wilkes Booth in the shadows. He was there, right there. You could see it all. Josh held up a hand to stop him. "Wait a minute. Why the assassination of Abraham Lincoln?" Josh waited and watched the slow but eager smile that crept across Coulter's face until the man nodded with eyes gleaming. "You've got to be kidding me," Josh said, and looked around at all of the lab techs looking back at him. "You were going to try to stop Lincoln's assassination?" he said, and didn't know which way to turn. "Dear God, I knew it. You people are incredible. Think, for one moment, just think about what you're doing." Coulter spoke with a cool calmness that was beyond calculating. "We are thinking, Josh. Till now we were at the mercy of our past, merely the effect of a preceding cause, forever separated by the barrier of time. Thanks to you, we now have a tool connecting us, a conduit to the past, a past filled with tragedy and horrors. Now with this machine, we are given a chance for us to break through that barrier and go back to correct mistakes. Think of it, Kennedy, King, Sadat, 9/11. We can fix it all, make everything right. Josh listened, soaked it all in, then pointed at the time chamber. I know what you're saying and I know what you think that is, but it's not a tool to make things right. That's Pandora's box. You open that up and all hell's gonna break loose. Simon shook his head in disappointment.
Always the skeptic, always the alarmist.
Josh rounded on Pelletier. Stuff it, Simon. Josh shifted his attention back to Coulter.
Listen to me, this is no joke. I don't care what your intentions are. You use this thing, there is no way to accurately predict what effect you will have on the present. Anything could happen. You could make 9/11 worse. Don't ask me how, but it's possible.
By now, Josh had attracted the attention of several security officers. With automatic weapons slung across their chests, they converged on the location until Coulter signaled to them. With a wave of his hand, the men paused. Some returned to their positions and Coulter turned to Josh once more. As I said, it's just a tool. We control its application and usage.
Josh shook his head and repeated the phrase with mock laughter. Application and usage, that's good. But what about effect and outcome? Have you tried to control that yet? No. Why? You can't, because absolute probability is not quantifiable.
The lab techs on the control platform glanced at each other as they considered the warning, while KC Maltese approached and listened to Josh's impassioned plea. Look, I'm telling you the effect this tool will have on our present cannot be calculated with any certainty. The resulting reality shift could easily wipe us out and replace us with an alternate reality that may or may not even include us. Entire civilizations could be erased. We're talking the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. Again, they just stared, and the sudden realization made Josh take a step backward.
That's it, isn't it? That's what you want.
Coulter stepped closer, and for the first time seemed truly concerned and sincere. By correcting injustices, we cut out the cancer before it spreads. This is our chance to make the world what it was meant to be. We're just doing what's right, Josh. And thanks to you, we have the power. We have that ability. Before Josh could respond, Pelletier stepped forward to correct Coulter.
We almost have the ability, which brings us back to you.
Coulter added, yes, there's something missing. We're calling it the X Factor, and I believe you know what it is.
The catalyst,
Josh said softly as Coulter continued. We need it for the test run, the maiden voyage. Without it, the pod won't go, Coulter said, then switched to sales mode without a pause. And in light of your great respect for this brave new frontier, we would like to make you our new project director and have you take over operations. Work out the bugs for us and supervise the initial launch with the valuable assistance of Dr. Pelletier as co-director to help you along the way. Pelletier smiled as if to show no hard feelings. Josh was suddenly overjoyed. Hey, how about that? Wow, the opportunity to be your lackey and play the fool after you've stolen my idea and shoved it in my face. Let me think about that. Josh's transition to absurd cynicism wasn't nearly as smooth or gracious, as he pretended to ponder the offer, then came up with an idea of his own. Hey, I know, how about this? How about I line the entire laboratory with C4 explosives, set fire to the building, and watch the whole thing explode on national TV? How are you with that? Josh looked back and forth at Coulter and Pelletier, as though they were actually listening. Coulter smiled and shook his head. You know, Josh, if I thought you were serious, I'd have no choice than to have you shot where you stand. 4 agents in dark suits moved in front of the soldiers in coveralls and stood just beyond the control platform. One man, tall, with black hair slicked straight back, slipped his hand inside his jacket and waited with cold, steely eyes. Agent Vega stood with the best angle on the target and smiled when Josh spotted him in the crowd. Coulter had made the threat clear, but the agent with his hand on his gun made it real. Josh raised his hand slowly and backed away, carefully negotiating his way down the platform steps to the lab floor. Slowly, he moved past KC Maltese with his arms raised and backed away, up the main aisle, past row after row of monitors, lab techs, and workstations. Thank you for coming, Josh, Coulter called from the control platform as though he had paid the man a compliment instead of threatened his life.
The throng of scientists stared and pointed as Josh kept moving, headed for the exit. "We'll be in touch," Coulter said, his words echoing through the lab. "It's just a matter of time," Josh shouted back, allowing everyone to consider the irony of the pun as he left the laboratory. Once he was outside, Josh looked at the world around him with a new awareness, the quiet and calm understanding that as the inventor of time travel, if anything went wrong, it was all his fault. And he was ultimately to blame.